All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, there's a very popular saying that I'm sure that many of you are very familiar with, that being that insanity is when someone does the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So by that notion, one has to question whether or not James Harden is insane. Because every season, we watch him expend all of this energy, regular season game after regular season game, trying to prove how many points he can score and how many assists he can accumulate, only to reach the playoffs and be extinguished in the second or third round of the playoffs because he fails to adapt his game to the postseason style of play and to properly conserve the energy during the regular season that he's going to need during the postseason. So how will this result in how many championships he does or does not win? So how will this mindset affect how many championships he eventually does or does not win? And will he be evaluated based on a curve with the understanding that there were so many responsibilities that he had to embrace season after season? Maybe like a modern day shooting guard version of Karl Malone. Who knows? They're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Tracy, you are one of the few humans on the planet who has ever had a run even close to this. It is you, Kobe, Harden, Wilt, and Elgin Baylor. That is it, ever. So you are the person to ask, is Harden carrying a load like this sustainable, not just through the season, but to the playoffs?
Absolutely not. The precedent has already been set by James Harden that he's never been able to play up to his regular season standard in the playoffs. So why would you ask a question whose answer has already been firmly established?
Well, since you're at the playoffs, no, I don't think this is sustainable. I think with Harden, we've seen him in the regular season where he can put up crazy numbers and go on stretches like this. He is one of those guys that just loves to hoop. He loves to play the game of basketball. So that's why he can come up and put up these type of numbers. It's crazy to see him doing what he's doing. I mean, if you guys don't understand what it takes to come out and shoot the ball 30 times,
tell me.
This is regular season. He could do this regular season.
But
the problem
are you tired after these games? When you went through this streak, you had one of these streaks. Were you tired?
No, because he's doing a great job of pacing himself.
I'm not quite sure if I agree with that, Tracy McGrady. Does James Harden do a good enough job of pacing himself? How can we say that when his usage rate is so high, when the pace of the game is so fast? Even if we're going to assert that he does not play great defense or he does not expend an exorbitant amount of energy on the defensive end, still, the level of responsibilities that he has on offense, all the roles that he plays, it is going to have a draining effect on him before the playoffs.
Like on the defensive end, these guys, they're not running through screens. All they're doing is switching. They're switching everything. So he's really, I mean, his energy is being put out on the offensive end. Defensively, these guys are just switching everything. In the playoffs, that's when the intensity heightens and you have to be locked in, dialed in on every possession, and it wears you down. You can't do this in the playoffs.
Well, he can't. He can't do this in the playoffs.
I think he can sustain this for himself as an individual, and I think that's where the game has turned today, is more individual players. You're seeing guys do things from an individual standpoint.
Right, but Scotty, the question is whether or not he can sustain it into the playoffs. Do you really believe that he's going to be able to average 36, 37 points a game in the playoffs when he's facing far higher level competition that is going to be game planning to get him into positions on the basketball floor that are going to force him to make bad decisions? Please understand that just like James Harden has a precedent for wearing down in the playoffs, he also has a precedent for turning the ball over an exorbitant amount of times, especially in pivotal playoff games. This guy has the record for most turnovers in a playoff game.
You take Russell Westbrook, last 2 years, averaging a triple-double. James Harden dominating the ball on the offensive end, bringing the ball up the court, shooting the ball, making the pass for the guy to shoot. So, yes, he can sustain this because of the way that he plays and make that consistently.
Right, but it's about the playoffs, Scotty. It's not about the regular season. And that's how I know that Scottie Pippen interpreted the question to mean regular season, because he used Russell Westbrook as a reference. What Russell Westbrook has done the last 2 seasons has strictly to do with the regular season, because Russell has not had any success in the playoffs.
Are you trying to convince me that there is more ISO today than in your day?
Oh, for sure, for sure. I mean, I hear people say all the time,
There's
like,
no comparison.
You can say that and you played with Michael Jordan. Well, Michael never brought the ball up the court in if he did, it was more, we were sharing it. James Harden brings the ball up.
Rachel Nichols makes a great point, though. There was a lot of isolation back in the 90s, especially in the Michael Jordan era. As a matter of fact, Michael Jordan is the player that made the hero ball style of the early 2000s so popular. A style that really brought the league down after Jordan retired, because he was the only player who was able to play in that style and have it be a charismatic style of play to watch. Tracy McGrady, Kobe Bryant, Vince Carter, Allen Iverson, they all tried to play in that same form, and it was never as charismatic as when Jordan did it. That is why I've stated in the past that one of the most important periods in the history of the NBA, in the recent history of the NBA, was when the Mike D'Antoni Phoenix Suns came into the forefront in the mid-2000s and brought back the ball movement and the player movement and the fast pace of the mid to late 80s.
Every time down court, and he makes the play that leads to the shot. So he's getting something out of every possession, whether it is a shot or not.
Yeah.
His usage is higher than anybody I've ever seen.
Second highest ever compared to Russell Westbrook when he had his MVP season.
It's incredible. I mean, he brings the ball up. He initiates the offense. He does everything for these guys. And
I think it's time for us to rewrite the record books in terms of the new NBA.
yeah,
Because it's a different game now.
Right.
It's a totally different game. It really is. When I sit down and I watch an NBA game, it looks so different from what I watched back in the 90s.
every great player that's come through this league and put up numbers
He
in the
will
past,
eventually be
these
phased
guys
out.
are going to surpass them because of the way the game has changed defensively, the rules, their usage rate, shooting all these threes. This is
Right, but this is what the NBA wants. It's also what the NFL wants. Back when I first started watching football, you could lead the league in receptions with 85 catches, 90 catches. You were going to lead the league in catches. Now you have to catch at least 125 balls to lead the league in receptions. I remember when Sterling Sharp caught like 104 or 106 passes back in like 92 and 93. And he broke the record. He broke Art Monk's record for most receptions in a season, and I was blown away. I couldn't believe it. And then Jerry Rice caught 100 balls, I think, the next season. And then you had Chris Carter, who had, I think, a couple of 120 catch seasons back-to-back in the early to mid-90s. And that kind of caused a paradigm shift when it came to the standards of excellence and the standards of leading the league in receiving during that time period. Right now in the NBA, in order to lead the league in three-point shooting, you have to be shooting 45+% from the field, from the three-point line. You have to make 400 threes in a season. Like, that's what Steph Curry's doing. So they're revolutionizing the game, and they're opening it up more so that there can be more offense. So like McGrady states, you're going to see a lot of these offensive records get toppled.
It's an entirely different game, Rachel.
Well,
And that's what makes many of the offensive numbers that Jordan put up in a defensive era stand out all the more. Michael Jordan was shooting 50% in an era where it was very, very difficult for a shooting guard to shoot 50%, especially when you had the basketball as much as he did.
well, we had different pacing and pace of game in sort of the old era in the 60s, and then a very different pace and style of game.
Let me help
90s,
people out
and
there
now.
put what James is doing and what MJ did in perspective. James Harden is averaging probably about 13 threes that he shoots a night.
Mm-hmm.
MJ on his best year of shooting threes averaged only 3.
No, it's
Right?
It's
3
crazy.
threes.
right. I mean,
Two totally different eras. Back in Jordan's era, the only players who were allowed to take multiple threes in the game were the specialists, or if you were known for being an extraordinary jump shooter, like Mark Price, Larry Bird. Those type of guys could take a lot of threes. Dale Ellis. Craig Hodges was a specialist, but if he got hot, they give him the rock. Now, Michael Jordan came into the 89-90 season having worked on his three-point shot the previous offseason. After 1989, in that offseason, he worked on a three-point shot. And he was able to get his proficiency numbers up to a relatively respectable level. I think he was like a mid-30s three-point shooter for that era. That was very good, especially when you're a three-point shooter who's taking most of your three-point shots off the dribble. He actually entered the three-point shooting contest in 1990. A lot of people don't know this. He performed terribly in the three-point shooting contest, but he still had the courage to enter because he had worked so hard on his three-point shooting in that off season after 1989. But once again, during that time period, that was not a staple of your offensive attack. The three-point shot was a shot that guys took if they were hot or if the team was down big and they were trying to stage a comeback. Now the three-point shot is a primary weapon in the NBA. It's just a totally different game.
I mean,
And
even
both
Steph
averaging
isn't even
30
close to him and
no,
how many threes
no.
he actually takes. His accuracy, of course, different. Coming up.
But anyway, that's basically it on that. It will be very interesting to see whether or not James Harden starts to peter out in the playoffs as he's done in years past. These two NBA legends have prognosticated that he will, or at least Tracy McGrady has. Scottie Pippen did not seem to understand the question. But when we get to the playoffs, it's going to be like night and day, because you're going to be facing teams with a higher basketball IQ, meaning they're going to understand their defensive fundamentals and their defensive principles on a far higher level. And if you pay attention, most of these great games that you see players like Harden and Russell Westbrook having in the regular season, where they have these 50-point triple-doubles, is mostly against the lower-level teams or the teams that might be coming off of a back-to-back, things of that nature. And it's not taking anything away from Harden or Westbrook, but we know what type of players they are. They're lower-level versions of LeBron James. And when James Harden gets to the playoffs and he faces a team that is allowed to get more physical with him, his proficiency numbers will drop. But anyway, peace.